everyone, and thank you for watching the Uranium, Titanium, Calcium, Neon, Tungsten, Sulfur Show, or the UTiCa News for short. Our topic for this segment is trichloromethane, also known as chloroform. With each element on the table, we see a different story, and we have one that will certainly get a reaction out of you. Here with me now is Carrie to talk about the history of chloroform. Thank you for joining us, Carrie.
The first man-made anesthetic was diethyl ether, used by some Greek guy in 1540. Funny story, he used it in his bird feeder and found his hens would fall asleep after eating it. Nobody cared until around 1842 when American surgeon Crawford Williamson Long used it to put someone to sleep in order to remove some neck tumors. 5 years later, chloroform was discovered to be effective as an anesthetic, but when it was first discovered in the 1830s, it was used as a treatment for asthma, persistent coughs, and other breathing conditions. After studying, it was observed that inhaling the vapor caused drowsiness, then deep sleep.
Oxygen magnesium.
I almost didn't catch that. Yeah, very punny of you. So chloroform was used as an anesthetic, but over the years we realized that the compound was toxic. This chap named Benjamin Richardson published a study in 1870 that analyzed 80,000 operations using chloroform and found death to be 1 in 2,500 cases. At this time, they thought it was due to genetic makeup. Soon after, Thomas Brunton studied the effects of drugs on the heart and found that chloroform blocked the vagus nerve, which runs from the brain to major organs like the heart.
So we initially thought it was medicinal and perfect as an anesthetic, so understanding it as a toxic substance?
Yep. Actually, the more we found chloroform to be toxic, the campaign for using ether as an anesthetic instead took the effect of hydrogen combustion. Fun fact, in 1882, it was observed that chloroform in the air would react with light to make phosgene to be used as a chemical warfare agent in World War I.
Very interesting. We appreciate your time on the UTiCa News. Welcome, Dr. Droutman. I understand you're a research scientist on the drug chloroform. Can you tell me a little bit about it?
Hi, yes, pleasure to be here. Chloroform's chemical name is trichloromethane, made up of carbon, hydrogen, and chlorine.
So how do we come into contact with chloroform?
Well, you can be exposed to it orally, where it is absorbed through mucous membranes. Although water, food, and oral drugs contain minute amounts of chloroform, significant chronic poisoning is unlikely. You can also inhale it, which is the most frequent way we come into contact with it. We don't usually like to inhale it, but when someone is in the unfortunate situation of inhaling chloroform, mild poisoning causes slight shortness of breath and dizziness. More severe poisoning causes nausea, vomiting, drowsiness, various levels of impaired consciousness, convulsions, and respiratory center paralysis. Dermal exposure may cause irritation, especially in those very sensitive areas. Absorption this way is usually not significant, but effects can imitate those produced by inhalation. Eye contact with liquid chloroform results in painful irritation of the eye structures, burns, and may cause corneal necrosis and ulcers.
So inhalation is the most severe of exposures. What happens once you inhale chloroform?
In the movies, someone passes out within 2 seconds of coming into contact with a napkin. But here's what I tell directors of movies that they are inaccurate and very foolish. We know 5 states of chloroform and its effects are gruesome, and then transition to each state varies by concentration and time. The first state is a happy, almost drunk kind of feeling. The second is a dreamlike stance. The third, the person is unconscious and relaxed, no longer feeling pain. With twice the amount of chloroform, that reached the 3rd stage. Depending on the person, they could reach either the 4th or 5th stage. They could be unconscious and deeply breathing, or their chest muscles could become paralyzed. The risks with administering chloroform are as follows. Too much too quickly could stop the heart immediately, or less over time could paralyze lungs while the heart still beats. To be blunt, if someone had a rag drenched in chloroform over their mouth, they would absorb so much of the compound they would die soon after. They wouldn't wake up from such a very tragic episode like Hollywood makes us believe.
Since there's such a fine line between the different states, what happens to your body once you're exposed to it?
Essentially, chloroform causes progressive depression of the central nervous system, ultimately producing deep coma and respiratory center depression. It is also hepatotoxic and nephrotoxic. Many cases show jaundice due to liver failure and/or kidney failure as the kidneys try to metabolize this compound. This is precisely why we have abandoned the use of chloroform as an anesthetic.
Thank you so much, Dr. Droutman. Joining us next will be Anne. Anne is a forensic analyst and will be discussing how someone was murdered with chloroform.
Thank you, Emily. Well, there was just a case last week. We were unable to convict Mrs. Bartlett for killing her husband with chloroform. She played the role of an innocent housewife. She was acquitted, and then she ran off with her husband's fortunes. He was found in his bed with a trace of chloroform in his stomach. At first, we couldn't figure out how Mr. Bartlett passed away so peacefully because chloroform would sear the nose and throat when being administered.
How did the crime scene look when you saw it?
Well, when I first walked into the room, it reeked of chloroform coming from a brandy glass. So then I began to think, if it were mixed with other things, the chloroform wouldn't have burned his throat and would have dissolved quickly without odor and worked as a sedative as long as there was only 0.3 milliliters of chloroform.
You think Mrs. Bartlett mixed chloroform into his drink and that is how she killed him?
It is definitely a possibility, but we also came up with another possibility because Mrs. Bartlett could have suggested to breathe in some chloroform to Mr. Bartlett to cure some of the pain he was having once he was off into a deep sleep. Mrs. Bartlett could have just left a napkin over his mouth until he died.
Thank you. I appreciate you hopping into a time machine to travel into the future to our present day to tell us about this information.